He set a coffee can full of cash on my workbench and slid it toward me the way you hand back a borrowed ladder. You're half Lena. Family doesn't need a receipt. 7 weeks. I had been gone 7 weeks. And in 7 weeks, they had sold a boat that took my husband 19 months and the last good summer of his life to build by hand. The cradle, where she had sat for 4 years, was empty. The floor was swept clean. There were no shavings left, and Theo's shop floor had never once in its life been free of shavings. Here is the part the man with the coffee did not know. My dead husband's signature was sitting on a bill of sale, dated a day he had spent strapped to a chemo chair. And my own signature was on a check I had never once written for $19,400. I read forged signatures for a living. I am a certified fraud examiner. I find the people who fake paper and I take them apart with their own ink. That afternoon, I came home and read the ones my own family had faked. One in my husband's name, one in mine, and I made every stolen hour cost them down to the hour. My name is Lena Marsh. I am 41 years old. If you have ever been the one your family leaned on and never thanked, the one they quietly decided was not coming back, stay with me to the end. Because the thinnest thing in that shed, a curl of white pine you could read a newspaper through, was about to become the one thing that saved me. Drop a comment with the town you are listening from and subscribe so the next one of these finds you. Now, let me take you back to the morning. I came up the coast before I knew what they had done. When you work a long forensic engagement, you learn to ration your attention. I had spent 49 days in a windowless conference room in Atlantic City, New Jersey, 3 of us and a federal examiner, unwinding a casino vendor kickback scheme one invoice at a time. No weekends. A burner schedule. My phone lived in a locked cubby from 8 in the morning until we broke at night, because the moment you let the outside world in, you lose the thread in the numbers. I am good at the thread. I have been good at it my whole life. That is the part of this story nobody in my family ever once thanked me for. I drove home on Saturday, April 18th. I crossed into Maine a little after noon and came up Route 1 with the bay opening on my right, gray and flat, and patient the way it gets in the slack water before the wind. I have made that drive 1,000 times. Belfast, Maine, population just under 7,000, a working harbor, a co-op, a fuel dock, and a hill of old sea captain houses looking down at the water, like they are still waiting for ships that are never coming back. My phone had been in the cubby for 7 weeks, releasing only on Saturday nights. So I had a backlog when I cleared the casino property and got real signal again. 22 voicemails, 41 text messages. I scrolled them at a rest stop outside Wiscasset with a paper cup of bad coffee going cold on the dash. 4 voicemails from my mother, every one of them cheerful, every one of them vague. One from my sister Whitney, who had not called me just to talk in 11 years. One from a number I did not recognize, a marine broker in Searsport. And one voicemail from Pearl Vance, my neighbor of 23 years, the widow of a man who used to run the Boyard travel lift. Pearl's was marked urgent. Time stamped Thursday, April 9th, 6:51 in the morning. I did not play Pearl's voicemail at a rest stop. Pearl Vance had spent 31 years as a deputy clerk of the Waldo County Probate Court. She had read more grieving families' worst paperwork than any pastor in this county. The first thing she ever taught me was that a calm voice on an early call is the loudest alarm. If Pearl had called me at 6:51 on a Thursday and marked it urgent, I was going to listen to it sitting still in my own driveway with the engine off. So I drove the rest of the way slow. And at the last stoplight before the bridge, I thought about something Theo had said to me once, standing at the bench with a plane in his hand and a curl of pine coming off the wood, as thin as paper. He said, "A true edge takes a shaving you can read through. Lena, the wood can't lie about a true edge. Only people lie. Wood just tells you the truth slower." I turned onto Bramhall Lane at 4:07 in the afternoon. The first thing I saw was not my house. The first thing I saw was Pearl Vance standing at the foot of her own driveway in a barn coat over a nightgown, holding her phone in both hands the way you hold something you are afraid of dropping. She was looking straight at me. She had been waiting. I pulled into Pearl's driveway instead of my own. She had the passenger door open before my truck finished rolling. She did not climb in. She did not ask about my trip. She held the phone up, screen toward me. An album already open. Honey, she said, I have been trying to reach you since the 2nd of April. I kept everything. I want you to look before you go inside, because once you go inside, you are going to stop being able to see straight, and you are going to need to have already seen this. There were 19 photographs on her screen. The earliest was time-stamped Wednesday, April 1st, 10:19 in the morning. There was one short video, 11 seconds. My husband ran the lift at that yard for 26 years. Pearl said, I know what a hand-built hull is worth, and I know what it means to the woman it was built for, and I know exactly who winched yours onto a trailer and drove it out of this lane. I looked across the street at my own place. There was a flatbed trailer parked across the mouth of my driveway, and there was a magnetic sign on the side of a pickup beside it that read Tibbetts Marine Brokerage, Searsport, Maine, and parked nose in at my shop. Blocking the big sliding door was a charcoal gray Chevy Tahoe with a dealer plate and a fishing club. My brother-in-law, Garrett's truck. Don't go in the shop first, Pearl said. Go to the shed and look at what is still in the dumpster. Otherwise, you won't make it through the rest of it. Stay with me here, because this is the part that changed everything. I walked across the lane alone. Beside the shop sat a 10-yard roll-off dumpster I had never ordered. Through the open top, I could see the long curved ribbons of the boat's cedar planking offcuts. I could see a smashed sawhorse Theo had built the first month we were married. And half buried under a torn sheet of house wrap, I could see the broken corner of a frame, and inside the frame, face up, soaked through from 2 days of April rain, was the half model. If you have never built a wooden boat, you may not know what a half model is. Before the first plank is cut, the builder carves the shape of the entire hull in miniature, sliced lengthwise, mounted on a board. It is the boat's whole soul in a piece of basswood. You can hold in 2 hands. Theo had carved the half model of the Lina Marie over one winter at the kitchen table. He named the boat after me before he had cut a single board of her. It was lying in a dumpster, rained on by people who knew exactly what it was. I did not cry. I took out my phone and I photographed the dumpster from 4 angles. I photographed the house wrap. I photographed the broker's trailer and the magnetic sign with the company phone number. I photographed Garrett's Tahoe and its dealer plate. Then I lifted the half model out with both hands. The basswood was swollen and dark. A seam had opened along the keel line. I set it on the tailgate of my truck, the way you sat down, something still breathing. Then I walked up to my own shop door and slid it open. A man I had never seen was standing inside with a clipboard and a ratchet strap over his shoulder, late 50s, canvas vest, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked at me for 2 full seconds before anything registered, because 7 weeks of sun off the water had darkened my face, and I was wearing a federal engagement badge lanyard I had forgotten to take off. Then his face arranged itself into a careful, professional smile. You must be the sister. We're just finishing the load out. Whitney said everybody's on the same page. It was Ross Tibbetts, the broker, and the word sister told me in 1 second the entire shape of the lie I had come home to. I did not return the smile. I walked past him. On the workbench, weighed down by the coffee, can full of cash that Garrett would hand me an hour later, was a manila folder. The tab was labeled in my mother's. Careful schoolteacher cursive. It said, Lina's copies. I will tell you what was in that folder. But first I have to take you back, because to understand what they did, you have to understand who they had always believed I was. I was the practical daughter. That is a polite word for the one nobody worried about, which is another way of saying the one nobody helped. My sister Whitney was the pretty one and the fragile one, and in my family, those came as a match set. When we were teenagers, my mother kept a running ledger in her head of who needed protecting. And Whitney was always on it, and I was always the one doing the protecting. I paid for my own community college. I drove myself to my own graduation. When our father left in 2004, it was 16-year-old me who learned how to read a bank statement at the kitchen table because somebody in that house had to. And my mother had decided out loud that numbers gave her a headache. That is how I became what I am. If you want to know, I learned to read money because nobody else in my family would. And then I turned the thing that saved us into the thing I do for a living. I never once got thanked for either. Here is the first incident, the one that should have warned me. When Theo was diagnosed in March of 2022, pancreatic stage 3, the first thing my mother said to me on the phone was not, "I am so sorry." The first thing she said was, "Well, is the house in both your names or just his?" I told myself I had misheard the order of her sentences. I had not misheard. I am a person who reads documents for a living. I do not mishear the order of sentences. I just did not want it to be true yet. The second incident came at the wake. Theo died on Saturday, the 8th of October 2022, 7 months from the diagnosis. He built right up until the last 6 weeks, slower and slower, until the plane got too heavy for his hand. At the wake, in my own living room, with the casserole still warm, my brother-in-law Garrett asked me a question. He asked it quietly with his hand on my shoulder. In the voice men use when they think, the voice does the apologizing for the words. He said, those tools out in the shop, the hand stuff, the bronze planes, the old ones, that is gotta be worth something to a collector, right? You are not gonna want to keep tripping over all that. His wife was failing at her third small business in 6 years. I knew that. The whole county knew that. I said, "They're not for sale, Garrett." He squeezed my shoulder and said, "Course not. Course not. Just, when you are ready." I want you to notice something. He was already counting Theo's tools while Theo was still in the room with us. In a box on the side table. That detail mattered later. I let it sit. The third incident is the one I keep coming back to because it is the one where I said no, and saying no is what they decided to punish. 14 months ago, last spring, Whitney and Garrett came to me for money. Not a small amount. $40,000 to keep their marine detailing business from going under, secured. Garrett said, "Bye, family." I told them no. I told them I would help them find a bankruptcy attorney and a real plan, but I would not hand them $40,000 to pour into a boat that was already half sunk. Whitney cried. My mother called me that night and used the word the whole family uses on me when I will not do the thing they want. She said, "You've always been selfish with what you have." Lena, Theo would be ashamed. Theo, who had loved me without a single condition for 9 years, would not have been ashamed of me for 1 second of my life. But that is the line they reach for. Theo would be ashamed. Theo would want you to move on. Theo would not want you living like this. They reached for my dead husband every time they wanted something because they had figured out he was the only lever that still worked on me. What none of them understood, what not one of them had the patience to learn, was that Theo had figured that out first. He had figured it out before any of them, and he had done something about it. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Pearl, because Pearl is the reason I am able to tell you this at all. Pearl Vance moved into the house across the lane the same autumn Theo and I bought ours 23 years ago. Her husband, Walt, ran the travel lift at the yard and could pick a 40-foot hull out of the water and set it on stands without spilling a coffee balance on the rail. Walt died in the winter of 2018. Pearl had buried him and gone right back to the probate court the following Monday because she told me grief is a thing you do after 5 o'clock. Before 5 o'clock, other people's grief needs filing. Pearl and Theo were friends in a way I did not fully understand until after he was gone. He used to bring her the first shaving off every new boat, a perfect long curl of pine, and she kept them in the mason jar on her windowsill. She had a whole jar of first shavings from boats Theo built for other people. When the Lina Marie was started, he brought her the first curl off my boat too, and she put it in its own small jar, separate from the rest, and labeled it in pencil. The day I came home, sitting on Pearl's porch after I had seen the dumpster, and before I had opened the folder, I asked her how she had known. How she had known to start photographing on the 1st of April, 2 weeks before I even had signal. She set down her coffee and she said the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Sweetheart, in 31 years at that court, I learned one thing that never failed me. Love keeps the receipts. Love keeps every receipt. The whole boring stack of them, because love is not afraid of being checked. It is the ones who are stealing from you, who keep telling you that family doesn't need paperwork." I heard your brother-in-law say that very sentence standing in your driveway while a stranger backed a trailer up to your husband's shop. And I thought, well, there it is. There is the alarm. If that landed somewhere true for you, if you have ever had someone tell you that love is too pure for paperwork, right before they emptied your accounts, do me one favor. Comment the word receipt below. Just that one word. I read them. I will know exactly what you mean. Pearl had not just watched, she had worked it like the clerk she was. She had photographed the trailer and the broker's truck. She had photographed Garrett carrying the tool chests out, and she had taken the 11-second video, which I had not yet watched. And there was one more thing she had done, the thing only a probate clerk would have thought to do. When the certified mail truck came on the 2nd of April with a letter from my house, and my mother signed for it and carried it inside, and Pearl was certain, never gave it to me. Pearl had photographed a green return receipt card the carrier left clipped to her own box by mistake. The card had a tracking number on it, and the sender, printed in the corner, was a law office in Camden. Lynn DeFeast Estate Law. I knew that name. Theo had said it to me exactly once in the last month of his life, and I had let it go the way you let go of 100 small things when you are losing the person who is saying them. I did not let it go anymore. Now I have to compress some time for you because the next 3.5 years were the part of my life I rebuilt one ordinary day at a time. And you do not need all of them. You need 3 things. I worked. I leaned into the work the way some people lean into the rail of a boat. In a blow, because it was the one place the world made sense. I got my certified fraud examiner credential 9 months after the funeral. I took the long engagements, the out-of-state ones, the ones nobody with a family wants. I was good, and I got better, and I got known. And the irony of that is not lost on me, that I spent 3 years becoming the exact person who could read what my family did to me. And I built that person inside the silence they left when Theo died. I kept the shop. That is the second thing. I did not touch it. I swept it, I oiled the tools. I kept the Lina Marie under a canvas cover on her cradle. 11 planks, shy of finished. And on Sunday mornings, I made coffee in the percolator. Theo kept on the wood stove, and I sat out there with his logbook open on the bench. I never called it a shrine. I called it the shop. Every other room in that house was just a place I lived without him. The shop was the one room where he was still working, where the bench still had the last plane stroke he ever took on it. A stroke I could put my fingers in. And the third thing, I never opened the safe. There was a small steel safe behind the spa rack in the shop. Theo had set the combination and never told me. He had said in October of his last year, "You won't have to open it, sweetheart. But if you ever do, Harriet has the number, and Harriet knows what to do. I had asked who Harriet was. He had said a lawyer in Camden who answers her phone on a Sunday. And then he had been too tired to say more, and I had let it go. And 3.5 years later, a probate clerk handed me a photograph of a green card from a law office in Camden. And I finally understood what my husband had been doing on the mornings. He disappeared in the last good summer of his life. He had not been resting. He had been building me a second boat, one I could not see, one made of paper. I opened the folder on Pearl's porch. Lena's copies, my mother's cursive. There were 3 documents inside, and I'm going to walk you through them one page at a time, the way I read them, because the order is the whole story. The first page was bill of sale. Bill of sale. One partially completed wooden sloop. Builder's name Theodore Marsh, length 41 feet, together with assorted boat-building hand tools, and machinery as listed in attached schedule. Seller, Theodore Marsh. Buyer, Whitney Calloway, prior. Consideration, $1 and other, good and valuable consideration. Dated this 13th day of September, 2022. It was signed Theodore Marsh, and below his signature was a notary block, a stamp, and a second signature. The notary certifying that Theodore Marsh had personally appeared before him on the 13th of September 2022, and signed of his own free will. I read that page 4 times. Then I started counting the lies, and there were 3, and any one of the 3 was enough. The first lie was the date, the 13th of September, 2022. I knew exactly where Theo was on the 13th of September, 2022, because I was sitting next to him. He was in an infusion chair at Penn Bay Medical Center in Rockport, with a line in his port 3 weeks before he died. On the day his oncologist told us there was no medical reason to keep going. And Theo said he wanted to anyway, for me. He did not appear personally before any notary that day. He appeared personally before me and a nurse named Donna and a bag of fluid. The second lie was the signature. I have looked at thousands of forged signatures. A genuine signature is a single confident motion. A traced forgery has tremor in the wrong places, tiny pen lifts where the forger stopped to check the original, and a uniform pressure that a real hand never makes. This signature had all 3. Someone had laid a genuine Theo signature under a light and traced it slow. It was, professionally speaking, an amateur job. I have testified against better. The third lie was the stamp, and the third lie was the one that turned this from a sad family dispute into a crime. The notary's name on the stamp was Dale Pryor, Garrett's cousin. The commission date embossed in that stamp writ commission expires August 30th, 2022. The notarization was dated the 13th of September. Dale Pryor had notarized a forged signature with a commission that had already expired 2 weeks earlier. There is no such thing as a small version of that. That is a void instrument and a referral to the state, both at once. So that was page 1. A boat that was never legally sold, transferred by a dead man who was in a chemo chair, witnessed by a notary who was no longer a notary. Stay with me, because page 2 is where they made it federal. Page 2 was a photocopy of a check. The check was drawn on the operating account of Marsh Boat Works, the little business account Theo and I had kept for the shop. The check was made out to cash in the amount of $19,400, dated Friday, the 27th of February, 2026. And it was signed on the signature line, Lena Marsh. I did not sign that check. On the 27th of February, 2026, I was in a conference room in Atlantic City, New Jersey, 450 miles away, with my building badge logging me through 3 secure doors at 8:04 in the morning and out again at 7:19 at night. The casino's own access control system, the very thing I had been hired to audit, had time-stamped my whole day. I had an alibi built out of the exact kind of records I get paid to read. Someone had forged my name on a check for $19,400. And whoever cashed it had walked it into a bank, which is its own crime. And the account it drained was an account that, like everything else, was not actually theirs to touch, for a reason that was sitting in the safe 12 feet from where Russ Tibbetts was strapping down my husband's tools. Page 3 was a single sheet. My mother's handwriting again. It was a tally, a homemade accounting, the kind of person makes when they believe they are being fair. It read boat sold to broker 11,500. Tools sold to dealer 4,200. Operating account 19,400. Total 35,100. Lena's half 17,550. That was the coffee can. That is what was in the coffee can. Garrett was set on my bench. They had stolen $35,100 in cash, and they had decided, in writing in my mother's own hand, that the fair and loving thing to do was give me half of my own money back and call it square. Let me do the arithmetic out loud, the way I did it on Pearl's porch, because the arithmetic is the part that should make you put your coffee down. The boat sold for $11,500. Theo logged his hours. He logged them at the back of every logbook, every Friday, a single number for the entire build. I added them on the drive home at red lights. In my head, the way I add everything 2,340 hours. A master boatwright bills $85 an hour in this state, and Theo was a master, 2,340 hours times $85 an hour is $198,900 of labor. They sold it for $11,500. They sold $198,900 of a dying man's last work for $11,500. And they wrote me a coffee can for my half, and my mother called it love. I closed the folder. I did not cry on Pearl's porch. I cried later that night, alone, in the cab of my truck, parked at the public landing with the dome light off and the harbor black in front of me. And I cried exactly once for about 4 minutes. And then I was done because I had work to do and I'm very good at my work. I opened the safe that night. Pearl had the number. Theo had given it to her in a sealed envelope. In September of his last year, the same week, somebody forged the bill of sale, which tells you he knew. He knew which week the trouble would start. He had just hoped to be wrong. Inside the safe was a manila envelope with a seal of Linkivis estate law and one line in Theo's hand on the front. It said, Lena, if you are reading this, somebody decided you weren't a person. Harriet knows. I am sorry, and I am not. Take them apart. Harriet Lindvis answered her phone on a Sunday. Of course, she did. I called her at 9 in the morning, the day after I got home. I told her in 5 sentences what I had walked into. She did not ask me to slow down. She did not ask if I was sure. There was a long pause, and when she spoke, her voice had changed into the voice of a person who has been waiting a long time for a call she hoped would never come. She said, Mrs. Marsh, your husband came to my office on the 11th of August, 2022. He could barely sit upright in the chair. He spent 3 hours with me. He told me his family would come for the shop and the boat and the account within a few years of his death. And he told me they would do it while you were traveling for work. And he told me they would have your mother frame it as a kindness. He was right about all 4. I have been holding this file for 3.5 years. I will be at your house tomorrow at 1 in the afternoon. Do not sign anything. Do not cash that coffee can. Do not let Tibbetts move that boat 1 more inch. And tell him I said the magic word is Lyman. An. I told Russ Tibbetts that evening on his cell that the boat he had bought had been sold with a forged bill of sale and an expired notary, that I had photographs, and that my late husband's estate attorney had used the word lien. There was a silence on the line, 8 seconds long. The sound of a man's whole Sunday rearranging itself. Then Russ Tibbetts said something I did not expect. He said, Mrs. Marsh, I am going to ask you one thing, and then I am going to make you a promise. The thing is this. Did your husband build the Lena Marie, the actual man with his own hands? I said, yes. He said, then here is my promise. I have been brokering boats on this coast for 31 years, and I have never once knowingly handled stolen work. Whitney Pryor told me her brother-in-law passed, and the family was clearing the estate, and the widow had moved to Arizona and didn't want it. She showed me a bill of sale with a notary stamp on it. I am a broker, not a lawyer, and I took the stamp at face value, and that is going to keep me up at night for a while. So here is what is going to happen. I have not paid the family the balance. I am going to bring the Lena Marie back to your shop on my own trailer at my own cost tomorrow morning. I am going to bring you a sworn affidavit and a copy of everything Whitney signed and everything she told me. And I am not going to charge you $1 because somewhere down the line there is going to be another widow and another boat. And I want her name protected by men who do the right thing when they find out they did the wrong one. He paused, and then he said the line that I think about still. My father built lobster boats in Stonington. I should have known a hand-built hull. The second I saw her, I think I did know. I think I let the stamp tell me I didn't. That is on me, and I am going to make it right. The boat came home on Russ Tibbetts' trailer at 7 in the morning on Monday, the 20th of April. He winched her gently back into Theo's cradle, 11 planks, shy of finished, exactly where she had been. He shook my hand. He left an affidavit on the bench. That was 9 pages long and did not leave a single thing out, including the part where it made him look like a fool. An honest man will tell on himself in writing. Remember that it is one of the few clean tests there is, but the tools were gone to a dealer in New Hampshire, sold in a lot, scattered to whoever walked in. The half model was Rain, warped in a dumpster, and Theo's grandfather's handplane, the one with the worn rosewood toed and the iron sharpened. So many times it was half its original width, the one he had taken the last stroke of his life with. That plane had gone into the New Hampshire lot and could not be found. Some of it could be recovered. Some of it could not. That distinction was about to matter more than the family understood. Harriet Lindvist arrived at 1 in the afternoon on Tuesday, the 21st of April. She was in her 60s, gray hair cut short, a leather folder under one arm with the same Lindvist seal that was on the envelope from the safe. She did not look at the family. She had asked me to have them there, all four, and I had, because Harriet had said the reckoning needed to happen once, in front of all of them, in the room where it would land hardest. The shop. My mother sat on a stool by the bench. Whitney stood by the door with her arms crossed. Garrett leaned against the wall near his cousin Dale, the notary who I had asked to come and who had come because he did not yet understand what he had done. And there was one more person in the shop that afternoon, a person nobody had counted on. My niece, Junie, Whitney's daughter, 9 years old. She had come because Whitney had nowhere to leave her, and she sat on an overturned bucket in the corner holding a small mason jar. And I will tell you about the jar at the end because the jar is the whole point. But I did not know that yet. Harriet set her folder on the bench. She opened it. She looked at Garrett first, not my mother, and she said, Mr. Pryor, I am going to ask you to read one paragraph aloud. Clause 6.2 of the Theodore Marsh Revocable Living Trust, established the 18th of August, 2022. She slid a page across the bench. Garrett did not pick it up. So Harriet picked it up herself and read it in a calm, unhurried voice, and she did not raise it once. She explained in plain words what Theo had done. On the 18th of August, 2022, 7 weeks before he died, Theo Marsh had placed everything into a trust. The house, the shop, which the trust called by its old name, the Spar Shed, the boat, the Lena Marie, named in the trust by name, the tools listed individually on a schedule, including one antique smoothing plane. Rosewood tote, identified by Theo himself as irreplaceable, and a trust investment account funded by his term life insurance, $240,000. I was named sole trustee and primary beneficiary. And clause 6.2 said this: any sale, removal, or material alteration of the contents of the spar shed or of the vessel Lana Marie without the prior written consent of the trustee triggered the automatic reversion of the entire trust to a contingent beneficiary. Unless the breach was cured within 90 days at the personal expense of the responsible parties, with an additional penalty equal to 50% of the appraised value of any irreplaceable item lost in the process. The contingent beneficiary, the party that would receive everything if the trust was breached and not cured, was named in the document. It was a Hull and Spar Apprenticeship Fund, a nonprofit that puts kids from this county through wooden boat school. Theo had served on its board for 9 years. If his family broke the wall he built around me, the whole estate did not even go to a stranger. It went to a room full of teenagers learning to do the thing he loved, which was the cruelest and kindest possible thing he could have done to the people in that shop. And I understood reading it that he had chosen it on purpose. My mother said very quietly, "What is the property worth?" There, it was again. The first question she ever asks, Harriet answered without looking at a page. The house and the spar shed are appraised at $410,000. The investment account holds $240,000. The Lena Marie, as a one-off hand-built hull, is appraised at $38,000. The listed tools, $9,000. The total value of the trust is $697,000. That is the figure the Hull and Spar Apprenticeship Fund collects in full if the breach of this trust is not cured by the 17th of July. She let it sit. Garrett had gone the color of wet ash. Then Harriet slid one more page across the bench. And there is a second clause your son-in-law added that day. Mrs. Calloway, clause 8.1, personal liability. She explained it in 2 sentences. Any individual who personally signed a contract to sell or alter trust property for additional personal liability of $25,000 per vault violation, that liability was not shared. It belonged to the signer alone, and no one else in the family could take it on for him. Garrett had signed the bill of sale for the boat. Garrett had signed the consignment agreement for the tools. 2 contracts, 2 violations, $50,000 personal to Garrett that not one person in that room could help him carry. Harriet looked up at him for the first time. "Mr. Pryor," she said, "this clause was not written for you. Your father-in-law never met you angry. He wrote it for whoever signed. It turned out to be you." Garrett's mouth opened and nothing came out of it. And in the corner, his cousin Dale, the notary, said the first thing any of them had said in 5 minutes. He said, "Wait, what expired?" "My commission didn't." And then he stopped because he was a slow man, but not a stupid one. And he had just done the math on his own stamp. Now, I want to tell you what landed, because cold revenge is only worth telling if you can feel the verdict land. Let me lay it out the way Harriet laid it out in flat numbers, because the flatness is the point. The cure cost to make the trust whole was $62,000. That covered recovering what could be recovered, replacing the tools that could be replaced, restoring the shop, and conserving the half model. The penalty, 50% of the appraised value of the irreplaceable items that were lost and could not be recovered, the grandfather's plane, the original logbook pages, and the carved half model, appraised together at $22,000, came to $11,000. The forged check had to be repaid in full, $19,400. And Gary's personal liability, his alone, was $50,000. 62,000 plus 11,000 plus 19,400 plus 50,000. $142,400. That was the family's exposure to cure the breach. And if they did not cure it by the 17th of July, the entire 697,000 reverted to a roomful of teenagers. And the lien Harriet was prepared to file would attach to my mother's house and to Whitney and Garrett's house until it was paid. That was the moment the room understood that the rules my mother had lived by her whole life. The rule that family does not need paperwork. The rule that love is too pure to be checked. The rule that I was selfish and the others were fragile. We're not going to save anyone this time. Because the only person in our entire family who had ever kept the receipts was the man they had thrown into a dumpster, and the woman who read them for a living, and she was standing in front of them holding the whole boring, beautiful stack. At 1:40 in the afternoon, a Waldo County Sheriff's deputy named Officer Reyes arrived in the doorway of the shop. I had requested a civil standby. Behind her came two people I had asked to be there. The first was Della Brightwater, the regional director of the Hull and Spar Apprenticeship Fund. Carrying a binder, the second walked in on the phone Harriet, sat face up in the middle of the bench, on speaker, audible to the whole room. Russ Tibbetts. Officer Reyes said, "Folks, this is a civil standby. Nobody is under arrest at this moment. But nobody leaves this property until the attorney finishes, and any false statement made now is its own matter." Then Harriet said into the phone, "Mr. Tibbetts, state your name, your trade, and the circumstances under which you came to remove the vessel." Russ Tibbetts' voice came through clear. He stated his name. He stated that on Saturday, the 11th of April, he had been contracted by Whitney Pryor, who represented that her brother-in-law had passed, that the widow had relocated to Arizona, and that the family was authorized to sell the estate. He stated that she produced a bill of sale bearing a notary stamp. He stated that he had recorded the entire intake consultation, as his office does for liability, and that he had emailed the recording to Harriet that morning. And then, without anyone asking, he said, "I'd like to play 11 seconds of it, if the attorney allows." Harriet looked at me. I nodded. The recording was Whitney's voice, dated the 11th of April, in the broker's office in Searsport. And in it, my sister laughed and said, clear and unhurried, honestly, she'll never even notice it is gone. She is never here. She married a boat, and then the boat died. We're doing her a favor. The clip ended. The shop was completely silent. Junie, on her bucket in the corner, was looking at her mother. Whitney said, "That is not, I did not raise my voice. I said, you said she married a boat, and then the boat died. The boat is in the cradle behind you. Whitney, he is the one who is gone. And he left more of himself in that hull than this whole family has left in 40 years. That was the only sentence I said to her the entire afternoon. You want to know about my mother in that moment because she is the system in this story, the calm, methodical one. And the system has to break for the verdict to mean anything. She reached for the coffee can on the bench. The cash. It was the only object in the room she could still believe was hers to hold. Her hand was shaking, and from her bucket in the corner, Junie said in a flat, honest voice that only a 9-year-old has, "Grandma, that is not yours. That is Aunt Lena's. You wrote it on the paper." My mother set the coffee can down. She began to cry then, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the cry of a woman who has just understood that the rule she enforced her whole life will never load, bearing, and the one person who actually held the family up was the one she had spent 40 years calling selfish. She looked at me and she said the thing they always say, "Lena, we are still your family." And I looked at her, and I gave her the only line I had been saving, the one I had built on a 4-minute cry in a dark truck at the public landing. I said, "I know that is the part that is going to cost you the most." Della Brightwater stepped forward. She did not speak to my mother. She did not speak to Whitney or Garrett. She spoke to me and she said, "Mrs. Marsh, your husband sat on our board for 9 years. He funded 2 scholarships a year out of his own pocket and made us promise never to put his name on them. We have been quietly checking on this trust for 3.5 years. because he asked us to, we are not here to take anything from you. We are here because the document says we have to be, and because we would be honored to help finish the Lena Marie in his shop with our apprentices at no cost, if you'll allow it. He taught half of them. They want to put the last 11 planks on the boat he named for you. That was the first warm thing that had happened in that shop in 7 weeks. And I let it sit in the room, and I did not cry because I had used my one cry already, and I meant to keep my word to myself. Here is how it ended, and I am not going to give you the cheap version, because the cheap version is a lie, and you have been lied to enough in this story already. We did not become a family again. I want to be honest with you about that, because somewhere out there, one of you is hoping I am about to tell you that they apologized, and we cried and we healed. And I am not going to tell you that because it is not what happened, and it is not what you deserve to hear. Garrett paid his $50,000 over 18 months because the alternative was a lien on his house, and his cousin Dale lost his notary commission to the state and a misdemeanor referral on top of the expiration, because you cannot unexpire a stamp and you cannot unnotarize a dead man. Whitney and Garrett's business closed for good in the fall. My mother cured her share of the breach by the 17th of July because a roomful of teenagers was going to take her house otherwise. And she has not, in the year since, sent me one text that did not arrive on a holiday and read like it was written for a jury. The forged check repaid the account. The bill of sale was voided. The tools that could be found were found. And the family escalated the way they always do, the way the people who wronged you always do once they realize the wronging did not work. There were voicemails. There was a long email from my mother with the word sorry in it exactly 0 times and the word family in it 11 times. There was a Sunday in June when Whitney showed up in my driveway and I stood on my own porch and said one sentence, which was, Russ Tibbetts will tell you why you can't come in. And I went inside and let the door close. I answered every escalation the same way, with silence or with one cold line and then with a door. But I told you the jar was the whole point, and it is, so here is the jar. When the apprentices came in May to finish the boat, Junie came with them because she asked to, and because a 9-year-old who tells the truth in a room full of liars deserves to be in the room where the truth wins. On the last Sunday, when the 11th plank went on and the Lena Marie was a whole halt for the first time, Junie walked up to me with the mason jar she had been holding the day of the reckoning, and she handed it to me. Inside, it was a single curl of white pine, thin enough to read a newspaper through, pencil on the lid, in a child's careful print. First shaving Aunt Lena's boat from Uncle Theo. Theo had given Junie the first shaving off the Lena Marie the winter he started her, the same as he gave Pearl one off every boat. A 4-year-old had carried it around for years and never lost it. When the family was filling a dumpster with everything her uncle ever made, the only piece of him that nobody threw away was in a jelly jar in the little girl's room. Because she was the only one in that family who understood, without being able to say it, that you keep the things love makes. She kept the receipt. The 9-year-old kept the receipt. We launched the Lena Marie at the public landing on a Saturday morning in September, 3 years and 11 months after Theo died. Pearl was there. Russ Tibbetts was there, and he cried, which an honest man will also do. Della and the apprentices were there. My mother was not invited and did not come. Junie poured the curl of pine from the jar into the bay off the bow because I asked her to, and it floated for a second, thin and white and true, before the tide took it. I sat in the boat for the first time that afternoon, alone, after everyone had gone home, and I opened Theo's logbook to the last page he ever wrote on, the night before his last good day, and I read it out loud to the water. He had written, "A boat is just trust you can stand inside. That is all she is. You shape every piece, true. You fasten it honest, and you trust the whole to hold you up in weather you can't see coming. I built Lena one she can stand in after I am gone, out of cedar where I could, and out of paper where I couldn't. And I trust them both to hold. If anybody ever tells her that love doesn't need to be written down, She should know that everything I ever felt for her, I put in writing, because the people who mean it are never afraid of the receipt. Keep the light on, sweetheart. The true edge takes a thin shaving hold to the true edge. I closed a logbook. He had written it 3.5 years before they proved every word of it, right? The boat held me up. She holds me up still. And the thinnest thing in that shed, the curl of pine you could read a newspaper through, turned out to be the truest, because the truth is always the thin one. And my husband knew it, and he left me the tools to prove it. If this reached something in you, if you have ever been the one who kept your family afloat and got called selfish for it, share it with the person who needs to hear that love is not too pure for paperwork. That the ones who keep telling you family doesn't need a receipt are usually the ones already at your accounts. And that somewhere the person who really loved you wrote it all down because they were never once afraid of being checked. Keep the light on. Subscribe so the next story finds you. I'll be on the water.